step. What can figure it out? That's how it chooses you.
Hey, what's going on, Teresa Sparks?
Hello, Claire Patton. Not much is going on. I'm drinking some tea. I'm getting prepared to listen to you. I have to gear up a lot because I got to be ready to receive the awesomeness. I can't just be here all passive. Got to actively engage with that when it comes.
That's right. You all prepare yourselves, starting now.
Brace, everybody.
So we've been doing this coffee subscription. Oh. We live in the middle of nowhere. So we can't just pop out and get, first of all, coffee, 100% necessity. We can't just pop out and get it.
Yeah.
Spur of the moment if we run out. So we've been doing a subscription through the wonderful Santa Cruz-based coffee company, small company, Cat and Cloud.
Nice.
And so we get this, 5-pound bag of coffee every 6 weeks. We've figured out, we did all the math. It's the perfect amount of coffee. We don't do many subscription things, but I gotta say it is awesome to get coffee just in the mail every so often. And just know that whatever your problems and addictions are, you're not going to have any issue fulfilling that need. It's just there.
Yeah, whatever your addiction is, you can have that delivered to your house.
Right. I'm not paid by Cat and Cloud. They're just awesome. They're good people.
This not sponsored. They're just great.
We've also been cooking more vegetarian and vegan meals lately.
Nice.
Not really anything intentional. We've just stumbled upon a couple of great recipes. So I actually, super easy, just made a pot of dal this morning in preparation for lunch. So this awesome recipe for red lentil dal from America's Test Kitchen. Oh, super, super good. And it is a little rainy and cloudy today. So it's kind of a comforting late spring meal. I don't know if I have it in August necessarily, but
yeah.
And then we've also been making this New York Times recipe for this crispy tofu with peas and mint.
Yum.
It's an Asian dish. It's got a little bit of soy sauce in it, I think. And it's a coconut milk based curry.
Mm.
It's super delicious and really springy.
Mm.
Our peas aren't quite coming up all the way yet, but I'm looking forward to doing that with our fresh peas from the garden because I think that would be legit.
Fancy. Oh, these peas? I grew these peas.
That's right.
I helped this pea plant. This pea plant's name is Arthur, and it was born in Weld County.
And this mint, I grew this mint. This mint plant's name is Berserker, and nothing's going to stop it.
Yeah, it's currently taking over my house. I planted one plant, and as we know, mint is a culinary weed, and so now it's just everywhere.
Yeah. We did it in a pot this year, which I think was smart.
Yeah.
Keep it under control.
You think.
Hey, did you know, everybody, you can root mint cuttings very easily. If you have a friend or someone who has a mint plant, just cut off a stem, remove the lower leaves, put it in a little jar of water in your kitchen, and in about a week, it will grow roots profusely, and you can just pot that up. So remember, nature is abundant.
Yeah, mint wants to live. It will help you. Yeah. This is our gardening show. Is like the reasons you should grow weeds. Like people call them weeds, but here's why you should grow them. And for me, the first is they want to grow. You don't have to baby them.
Yeah. And I gotta say, there is some real value in plants that just want to take over. When you're gardening, it can be so difficult and depends on your level of experience and where you're living. But to have a few plants that you know are just going to go nuts and make you feel good about yourself as a gardener and make you tap into that abundance that is, it's so valuable. It really is.
Speaking of, hold on one second. Hold on one second, Claire. You got to leave this in, though, because this is for you.
Okay. You look so mischievous. Oh, nice. Those are mortgage lifter tomato seeds, Teresa. Did you know that?
Those are mortgage lifter tomato seeds. After the episode you told me about them, I bought some, and I bought some for you.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's so late. They probably not for this year, but you never know, and you're magic, so.
We'll grow them next year.
Yeah.
That's another gardening tip, you guys. They put an expiration date on the seed packets. That's ideal, but that's no indication. Seeds are good, can stay good for years. I planted some mammoth sunflower seeds in front of our house. Mammoth sunflowers are, as you can imagine, giant sunflowers. They can get 12 feet tall. I planted some that we gathered from sunflowers we grew about 6 years ago, and they have all come up and they are taking over this little bed in front of our house.
Awesome.
To summarize, vary your diet, eat some vegetables, try a vegetarian vegan meal every once in a while, create a balance in your menu, grow some mint, make tea out of that shit, and eat mortgage lifter tomatoes.
This is my favorite. I love this. The end of the quarantine, the end of COVID has been me buying presents for you to be delivered at a later time.
Oh my God.
It makes me so happy. I have a little Claire's box where all your stuff is. It's so great.
Oh, that's amazing.
I love it.
It's like Christmas in June.
Yes. It's exactly like Christmas in June. Because as we've discussed before, Christmas did not go so well here in the Sparks household. I was like, we need a do-over, and it's going to happen on June 25th.
But what a great gift to get presents in June. Who gets presents in June unless your birthday's then?
Cancers.
This is the podcast It Chooses You. I am Claire Patton.
And I talk over Claire. You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know what I do, and it's that.
That's old Gabby Teresa over there.
Yeah. We talk about things we like. We like living in the country. Claire can't go to town to get coffee very easily. That's how living in the country she is. And I live in a suburb. Hello.
Please remember to like, subscribe, download our episodes if you enjoy this. It helps us spread the word to other people like you who are awesome. Thank you. I don't know where the hell this idea came from, but it's great.
All right.
I can toot my own horn here.
Yes, you are, because I'm sure you're right.
Today on It Chooses You, we're talking about turf wars.
Okay.
Loose interpretation of the phrase turf wars. We're not talking about lawns, everybody. We're talking about rivalries. We're talking about drama. We're talking about revenge. We're talking about pettiness. We're talking about petty beefs.
Yes.
Oh, so good.
We're talking about things someone might pee on and people who might be upset that they've peed on it. We're talking about marking territory.
That's right. We're going to start today by talking a little bit about the cutthroat world of street vendors in New York City.
Oh, Lord. Is it Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
Yep. There is a Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't remember what season, what episode, in which the character of Charles Boyle opens a food truck and shenanigans ensue involving other food truck vendors. I always thought that episode was very funny. Mm-hmm. And while researching this piece, I realized, oh, they didn't even exaggerate.
Okay.
To become a food vendor in New York City, this is street food vendor like hot dog stands or potentially a food truck. The permit costs $200 and is valid for 2 years. But the city has capped the number of food vendor permits since the 80s to around 3,000 a year. I think it's 3,100 or something like that. So as you can imagine, a lot of people want to sell food in New York City. The real estate's really high. It's a pretty cutthroat and competitive landscape in which to try and get a permit.
Yeah, capitalism does not like workers who can move around. They really prefer it if the workers are in one place.
That's right. It's pretty common for vendors to pay $20,000 for a permit. And a black market has risen up to meet the demand. So because of the black market, you're paying a premium for that permit, right? That $200 permit.
Yeah.
I don't know what's the inflation on that, 200 to 20,000? Is that a...
It's some kind
math?
of... There's
It's
a zero.
math.
They're adding zeros, which
yeah,
means
and you're
it's
just
big.
taking a 2 and making it bigger.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
That's
We
a
got
bigger 2 than usual. Yeah. Well, it's really funny, though, because that's such an easy thing to fix. So clearly someone in the New York City government is making money off this themselves, I would say. Because if you just make permits non-transferable, then the black market goes away.
Right. There's a man named Dan Rossi who has 2 carts in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Aha.
He's 70 years old.
Prime real estate, yes.
Now, I will say he has several other carts throughout the city. My question is, if you can pay $200,000 for a permit, how much fucking money can you make selling food on the streets of New York City? The police have been called out, I mean, just countless times to settle disputes between vendors on the steps of the Met, needless to say. These dudes are so ruthless that Rossi spent most of his nights pre-pandemic sleeping in a lawn chair inside his cart with his feet sticking out of the open door of his cart in order to make sure no one tampered or messed with his cart in any way.
Wow.
When the police finally told him he had to stop sleeping there, he parked his white van nearby and had been sleeping in that van ever since. The New York Times interviewed him a few months ago as the pandemic sort of slowing down. And he said, I guess the good thing about the pandemic was I was able to sleep in my own bed the whole time. But he lives in the suburbs, so he's been commuting every couple of days or so to check on his carts because he's left them there. That is how primo this spot is. The only time of the year, again, and all this is in regular operation, the only day of the year that he moves it is the Met Gala. And he said as soon as that last limousine leaves, he is back there.
Wow. Met Gala. The rich people really don't like it. They don't like to be reminded that there are hot dogs available on the street just around the corner. No, this night is about gowns. It's not about hot dogs.
That's right. You have to take your gown off before you eat the hot dog. Come on. So in addition to the food permit, I'm not really clear if the city is still doing this. They're not doing this in front of the Met, but the city used to charge up to $650,000 a year for vendors to reserve that spot in front of the Met.
Oh my God. Yeah, someone in City Hall's just making this money.
Oh, they have got to be. No, I will, just to make it clear, that is no longer the case in front of the Met. Again, I don't know what's happening throughout the rest of the city. At the time when Rossi came along and they were charging that kind of money for those spots, Rossi just set up 2 carts and refused to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So the police started coming around and started saying like, hey, you can't be here. And he said, well, yeah, I can because I'm here clearly. So I can. And he, by the way, he was a licensed food vendor. You know, he had his all of his paperwork for that, but he wouldn't pay for that spot. The city ticketed him over 100 times, arrested him, and eventually brought him to court, but he just kept showing up and selling there. And eventually, the city stopped charging for that specific spot, so he sort of was grandfathered in.
That's awesome.
When they went to court, he actually did his own legal defense, and part of his defense was based on an arcane state law that had to do with veterans of the Civil War not being charged for certain privileges and permits. And so that was kind of how it sounded like he was really instrumental in making the city stop
shaking food vendors down for the good spots.
In addition to the jockeying for position between these old school vendors like halal carts, like Euro carts, like hot dogs, in recent years, as you can imagine, starting in kind of the early 2000s, food trucks, fancier fare, have started to move into New York. And these older vendors fucking hate it. So they're like, look, I emigrated here from somewhere. I'm supporting a family. I have 2 other jobs. And like, you kids are coming in with your, I kid you not, PhD in bassoon playing from CUNY University. Like, one of the vendors had a PhD in bassoon playing.
Well, you're not making those sweet, sweet bassoon dollars like you used to. The bassoon market, the bottom's fallen out of the bassoon market.
The bassoon market is tapped out.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm telling you about is based on an article from the New York Times from 2009. So back in 2009, the owners of Street Sweets, a mobile dessert truck, having been open for about a month, had already been threatened at the truck depot where they parked their truck, just like in that Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode. They had been told by a Euro vendor that he was going to set their truck on fire. They were booted out of Midtown by several aggressive ice cream truck vendors. Quote, they think they can come in with their big fancy truck and push into a spot where I've been for 18 years, said Norman Sweeney, a jewelry vendor. What happened was Street Sweets was set up somewhere, and this jewelry vendor, Norman, just set up right in front of them, like immediately in front of them. And they were like, hey, what's going on? And they had an altercation over that.
I mean, I knew this was going to be interesting, but that's even more interesting than I thought, because that is not jewelry and ice cream, not the same market, not the same people looking for those things. Okay.
We'll get there because that's actually part of this. Norman said that he was working 2 jobs and sleeping in his truck, and he was sort of pushed to the brink. And he said, quote, this spot is all I have left. I mean, there is a real desperation to survive. And as we know, it's not cheap to live in New York City. These new food truck vendors are breaking the street code of New York City street vendors. There's this whole world of, I'm here at this time, you can be here at this time, then these other people come in here. If you come around my corner early, I'm going to be pissed off. There is a whole code of conduct. There are old school truces and arrangements. And so in come these new kids and they have no idea what's going on. So they just think they can park anywhere, but which they can. I mean, within legal limits. But according to the old school dudes, they've got to respect seniority.
Sure. But my thing is like, well, let's just think a little bigger, old school dudes, because imagine if you were chill and they were chill and you had on this block, we now have this collection of food trucks and you can, like, there's a reason that street in New York is all fucking flower shops, because one flower shop is not a big deal. But if there's a street where you can go to many different flower shops and get exactly what you want at any time, then it's an attraction of its own. So there's a jewelry vendor and a hot dog cart and a food truck and somebody with euros and a halal cart. And go there because there's all this food there.
That is not the attitude. So there's a cupcake vendor that said when he opened his truck, he naively thought that the other vendors wouldn't see him as a threat since he was selling cupcakes. And how would he possibly be a threat to a hot dog cart? But he said that that's not the case. He said they see a line in front of my truck and they think, hey, that's my line. There's no understanding that people might be in the mood for different things.
Oh, wow.
The week this article from 2009 was published, on a Tuesday, 6 people were arrested for vending permit fraud. The city doesn't officially enforce any kind of regulation on location anymore, but there is a code, as I said, between vendors, and these spots are worked for and earned over years and even bequeathed through family lines and sold on the black market.
This is just another good old boys network. I haven't heard anything to change my mind about that yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the vendors, Kenny Lau, the owner of a dumpling truck, said, quote, "It only works because everyone is a little bit in the wrong and no one is 100% clean. We can't go through legal channels to resolve our disputes." End quote. So they're all a little off, so they can't just contact the authorities to resolve the issue between vendors. As I said, there are a limited number of food permits issued by the city, and there's this black market revolving around it. Many vendors pay fixers to get their permits for them, or they go into business officially with established permit holders, but they're not really in business together. Also, and this is so shitty, the common form of retribution between these street vendors is to call on each other for permit violations.
Yeah. See, I have no respect for this. New York, 3,000 permits for food vending in a city with that many people is stupid. Okay, so let's just say that. That's first.
Yeah.
Second, if you are going to live in the gray area, sort of just outside of official sanction, in whatever that area is, that's not fully on the up and up per New York City statute, you don't get to call the cops. That's the thing. If you want to settle disputes among yourselves, then you don't get to call the cops on your neighbors. That's not a thing you're allowed to do.
Yeah.
Because if you're gonna use the official tools to punish other vendors, then you need to follow the rules that the officials set, just for your own integrity.
Exactly. It's the fucking Wild West out there. Now, big note here that in January this year, the City Council of New York actually voted to increase the number of permits by the number of 14 each year for the next 10 years. So they are increasing their baseline over the next 10 years. And it was funny because every article I read, there was a different vendor saying, well, there's not room for everyone, which I thought was such a funny attitude because like you said, there is this idea too that if you've got a row of food trucks, you're going to attract a lot more people.
Then it's a fair, you guys.
That is the cutthroat and insane world of New York City food vendors.
Man, what if they cooperated?
Impossible. Now we're going to change the tone a little bit, and we're going to talk about the epic rivalry and Hollywood turf war of Joan Crawford and Bette Davis.
I fucking love this story. Thank you so much.
I just want to say something up front. We are about to talk about 2 extremely talented artists who happen to be women, who were also deeply flawed. And we're going to talk about them being mean to each other. So here's my goal. I want to roll around and savor this drama. This is full on. It's not women supporting women.
At all.
We're going to just savor this drama. And then at the end, we'll step back a little bit and be more circumspect about why this was maybe like this and what was possibly going on. But at first, we're just gonna be drama-rama here. I'm not going to go super into their careers before the rivalry started because we're here for the drama, right? Joan Crawford was born in 1904, Betty Davis 1908. So there are only 4 years age difference between them. 1933 was a pivotal moment in Betty Davis's career. She had been a successful actress on Broadway, but she had moved to Hollywood in 1930, 3 years prior, and she had been just slugging it out trying to carve out some success for herself. She was originally signed to Universal Studios, but they dropped her because she wasn't conventional movie star material.
Whatever that means.
She signed with Warner Brothers, and then in 1933, she starred in the comedy Ex-Lady, in which her name was featured above the titles. And this was a super big deal for her. Warner Brothers launched a big campaign to market her as the new Hollywood it woman. However, on the same day this publicity was going to hit all the newspapers for Betty Davis, Joan Crawford announced that she would be divorcing her first husband. Obviously, this drama with Joan Crawford took all the limelight, and the New York Times banished the Betty Davis piece to a small paragraph in the back of the newspaper. Other newspapers all over the country followed suit. Ex-Lady left the theaters after a week of really shitty ticket sales, and Betty Davis's turf war with Joan Crawford began.
I would be very angry too.
Yeah. In 1935, just a couple years later, Betty Davis was filming the drama Dangerous. The moment she met her co-star, Franchot Tone, she fell hard. But Joan started dating Franchot, and the couple announced their engagement while they were still filming Dangerous. He was madly in love with her, Davis said. They met each day for lunch. He would return to the set, his face covered in lipstick. He was honored this great star was in love with him. I was jealous, of course. Crawford said that Franchot, quote, thought Betty was a good actress, but he never thought of her as a woman. Which is like, what the fuck does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah, this is rough.
Ouch.
Patriarchy hurts everybody, you guys.
In 1987, this is 32 years later after this happened, Betty said, quote, she took him from me. She did it coldly, deliberately, and with complete ruthlessness. I have never forgiven her for that and never will, end quote. So that's 32 years later. That is some grudge right there.
Joan Crawford actually married Betty Davis's love. Oh, okay.
Betty Davis won an Oscar for that performance in Dangerous. And at that Oscar ceremony, Betty Davis wore a really plain navy dress that was actually an old costume of hers. And she wore it because A, she thought there was no way she was going to win. And B, she was having some disputes with Jack Warner, the head of Warner Brothers. And she didn't want to go to the Oscars. And he basically, quote unquote, forced her to go. And so it was sort of like, yeah, well, I'm not going to play the movie star for you. I'm not going to be glamorous. She goes to the Oscars. She's sitting next to Franchot. And on the other side, of course, is Joan. And she wins. And she stood up, and Franchot stood up and gave her a huge hug and a kiss. And Joan Crawford sat there with her back to Betty Davis. And Franchot said, hey, Joan, you're being rude. And so Joan just turned her head slightly towards Betty and said, dear Betty, what a lovely frock. Meaning, not a lovely frock.
Yeah, this is a very mean woman, as we know.
So Betty Davis was fighting for her rights under her contract with Warner Brothers. So just imagine you signed with a studio and they were your bosses. And of course, at this time, they could tell you what to wear. They could tell you who to date. They would definitely tell you how often you worked. And they were working her to the bone. And the problem is, once you're signed to that studio, it doesn't matter what projects you're interested in. If they're doing that project over at MGM, your studio has to loan you to them for you to be able to do that project that speaks to your artistic integrity and interest. And maybe you want to work with that director. She was completely under the control of Warner Brothers. Betty Davis was very clear about what her needs were, what her wants were. She was a very strong advocate for herself, but there was only so much she could do. So she actually ended up fleeing to London to film a couple of movies that she wanted to film. Warner Brothers ended up suing her. And at the trial, the Warner Brothers attorney said, quote, this is a rather naughty young lady. What she wants is more money. Ugh.
Yeah, right. Oh, because working hard doesn't mean I get more? Like it's wrong to want to be compensated for this excellent work I'm doing? She
lost that trial, but according to some of the sources I read, this this trial gained her more respect with Jack Warner, which it's like, whatever. In 1943, Joan Crawford, who had been contracted to MGM, moved to Warner Brothers, where Betty Davis was working. At the time, it's said that Joan Crawford asked for a dressing room next to Betty, and she began sending Betty flowers and other gifts in an attempt to broker some kind of truce. And Davis returned all of the gifts. She was having none of it. You can imagine now they are in direct competition for the same roles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that was probably a factor in Joan Crawford trying to create a truce between them. Because if you think about it, it's like, this is already bad. And it's going to just get worse now that we're in competition for these roles.
Oh, that's interesting. And I don't know much. Like, I'm not an expert on this story. I've seen the miniseries, etc., read a couple articles or whatever. But my impression was always that those, quote, efforts to create a truce were purely theatrical and actually designed to just enrage Betty Davis.
That could be. I mean, we don't really know.
Yeah.
I can see it either way. I will say that publicly Betty Davis was much more open about her dislike for Joan Crawford than Joan Crawford ever was about Betty Davis.
Yes. Well, Betty Davis, my impression of her is that she's just like, yeah, no, I don't like her. But Joan Crawford is a politician.
Yeah.
And will just play and pretend and do whatever.
You cannot, I didn't have any evidence of this, but you cannot convince me that those studio executives were not playing them off one another.
Oh, of course they were.
100%.
No doubt.
Crawford really wanted the lead role in a noir film called Mildred Pierce, but it was offered to Betty first, who turned it down. The director didn't want to cast Joan Crawford, but eventually he relented when he saw her screen test because it was so good. Joan Crawford got the role, played the role, and ended up winning her only Oscar for that film. I would assume that created a little more bad blood because it's like, well, I turned this role down and then you just turned it into an Oscar win. Joan actually didn't think she'd win the Oscar, so she faked being sick so that she didn't have to go to the Oscar ceremony. Which, it's so funny, other than pandemic aside, almost everybody shows up to the Oscars now. Like, it's given. But back then, apparently, it was much more of a, I don't want to go. You know, people were politicking with their presence or lack of. So she stayed home and pretended to be sick. Once she found out she won, she quickly made herself up and invited the press into her home, where she accepted the Oscar from bed.
Oh my God.
Davis is quoted as having said, quote, "Miss Crawford is a movie star and I am an actress."
Woo! Fighting words.
Crawford ended up taking another role that Betty passed on in Possessed, which was a crime drama, and she garnered another Oscar nomination for it a couple of years after that first one.
If you're two women who are hardworking, no question, both of them just absolutely will work and work and work and work and work, right? And you're dedicated to this thing you want to do, and you've had some success doing it, and yet your lives are completely determined by your male overlords at the studio that employs you. Use whatever tools you need to use to get what you can in that situation. Yeah. Now, I would have loved to see them use whatever tools they needed to use, but also not undermine each other. But, you know, we do what we can.
And I thought a lot about this. And the thing is that both of them, and specifically Joan Crawford, they were hustlers. They worked so hard. There's a quote, I'm sorry I don't have it here, but from a female screenwriter at the time who said, "Nobody decided to make Joan Crawford a star. Joan Crawford made Joan Crawford a star." That's paraphrased. When Joan Crawford first arrived in Hollywood, she went, in addition to working, she went to clubs and bars every night to network, to meet people, to get her name and her face out there. Betty Davis was very similar. So I can imagine, like you said, if you're in a situation in which, you know, these men are in control, and then on top of that, you had to work so hard to gain what little you had. And then on top of that, you know that your time is short.
That's
that
right.
The time in which you are considered fuckable, let's face it, and therefore bankable, is so short. I can see where you would view women, other talented women, as a huge threat.
That's right.
A huge potential liability to your career and your career turf. So, I mean, no way in justifying it, but I'm saying I can understand.
Oh, absolutely. The idea that there's only a limited number of movies released a year and we're all fighting for our share of this tiny sliver of pie. You know, the solution is to just, there's enough pie for everyone. There are always projects for everyone. But capitalism says that if you have too much of a thing, then it will lose value, right? And so that's, the fight is actually based in the studio system where if you put out too many movies a year, any particular amount of money you might make from one of them is limited. Sorry, that's not a coherent economic argument.
It makes sense to me. And it's the same thing as the food vendors in New York City. It's the same exact mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Joan Crawford had relationships with both men and women. There is a rumor and a possibility that Joan was sexually curious about Bette Davis. But what I find funny about it is Bette Davis basically made it known, like, Joan's totally obsessed with me. She totally wants to sleep with me, which sounds like such an egotistical argument, you know? It's like,
egotistical junior high or high school. Totally.
she won't leave me alone.
Why is everyone so jealous of me?
As wronged as Betty may have felt at this point, she really had the ultimate shot at revenge when Catherine Albert, an old friend of Joan's, wrote a screenplay called The Star, which was a not-so-thinly veiled description of Joan as a washed-up actress clinging to her rapidly declining fame. Betty took the role and played the lead character, which must have felt pretty good. I am now going to play a part based on how sad you are. By 1962, both Betty and Joan stars had really faded quite a bit. So they're in their late 50s, early 60s at this point. They were both past what Hollywood considered their prime, and the studio system had changed quite a bit in the intervening years. They were both free agents, and they weren't under the thumb of the studios anymore. Needless to say, they were not being offered any kind of juicy or interesting roles.
It's interesting that back in the day, there weren't very many parts for women in their 50s and 60s. Thank goodness it's different now.
Mm-hmm. Joan approached Betty backstage at a Broadway show that she was in and proposed that they adapt and star in the novel that Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was based on. The film was a critical and commercial success, and it gave birth to a genre I hadn't heard of before called hagsploitation.
Oh, Lord.
And you have to imagine that after working so hard and maintaining a certain public image and seeing as your conventionally defined beauty starts to fade, seeing your career start to fade, and what I'm assuming was a lot of pent-up emotion, it must have been really liberating to just be in a movie where you got to be batshit.
Yes, ugly on purpose and batshit and have all those fights and scream all the screams. Yes, absolutely.
Ugh. So the film's about an actress played by Joan Crawford who is tortured by her fucked up sister played by Bette Davis. That's my summary. You're welcome. I wondered a little bit why Betty would agree to be in a film with Joan Crawford since they disliked each other so much, but I think that they were both so hungry for good roles and knew that this could revitalize their careers. And I'm wondering, too, if they had never been in anything together before, so maybe they wanted to capitalize on that rivalry a little bit, too.
Right. The wounds had some time to heal, a couple decades, you know. And like, maybe it might be fun to work with this person.
Yeah. Betty did have two stipulations for starring in the film. One, she wanted to play Jane. And two, she needed assurances that the director wasn't sleeping with Joan. She said, quote, "It wasn't that I cared about his private life or hers either. I didn't want him favoring her with more close-ups."
Mm-hmm.
Completely practical.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. This is where shit got real. Joan was on Pepsi's board of directors since her late husband was an executive there. So Betty had a Coke machine placed in her dressing room. And there's a scene in the movie where Bette Davis's character beats her sister, and Crawford asked for a body double because she didn't feel secure that Betty wouldn't actually beat the shit out of her. During the scene, there was a close-up that couldn't be filmed with a body double, so Joan had to be in it, and Betty supposedly hit Joan hard enough in the head to require stitches, though Betty says, "I barely touched her."
Oh my God. Didn't know about that.
I mean, that's like 8-year-olds on the playground. I didn't touch her. I don't know what's true there, so just being clear. There was another scene in which Betty had to drag Joan across the floor. And Betty had a bad back, and Joan knew this. So Joan filled her pockets with rocks and made herself dead weight so that Betty had to work really hard to pull her across the floor, aggravating her back. And then Joan ruined several takes on purpose so that Betty would have to keep pulling her. Whew, that is shitty.
But again, see, this is the politician in Joan, because nobody can fucking prove that shit.
Yeah.
But we see Betty Davis hitting Joan really hard.
Right. At the Oscars that year, the Academy gave a nomination to Betty and another supporting actor, but snubbed Joan. So what Joan did was she contacted every other nominee for Best Actress, and she said, hey, should you not be able to accept your award, I would be happy to accept the award on your behalf. And for some reason, every other actress agreed to this. So when Anne Bancroft won and Betty Davis was sitting there heartbroken, who should go up on stage to accept the award on Anne Bancroft's behalf but Joan Crawford? I mean, that's real shitty. That is real shitty.
And also brilliant from a shitty political perspective.
When Crawford died in 1977, Betty reportedly said, quote, you should never say bad things about the dead, only good. Joan Crawford is dead. Good.
I fucking love her.
It's really witty, and I love that. And I hate to put any kind of fly in the ointment there, but
don't yuck my yum, Claire.
No, I'm not going to totally yuck it. I will just say that one of the articles that was my sources from Harper's Bazaar, and the author said this is often said, but I could actually find no evidence, source for that. So take it with a grain of salt.
Okay,
it might be apocryphal. Also, in a lot of publicity stills from whatever happened to Baby Jane, the pictures of them on the set show them laughing together. I wonder how much of this was played up for publicity, because if there's one thing I'm sure about with these two women, they put their career first. Always.
Yeah. Yes. And we know that because of books their children wrote.
Perfect. Thank you. Joan died in 1977. In 1978, Christina, Joan Crawford's adopted daughter, wrote Mommy Dearest, her account of abuse at the hands of Joan Crawford. And at this point, Betty Davis actually came to Joan's defense. Quote, I was not Miss Crawford's biggest fan, but wisecracks to the contrary, I did and still do respect her talent. What she did not deserve was that detestable book written by her daughter. To do something like that to someone who saved you from the orphanage, foster homes, who knows what. If she didn't like the person who chose to be her mother, she was grown up and could choose her own life. End quote. She also said, I felt very sorry for Joan Crawford, but I knew she wouldn't appreciate my pity, because that's the last thing she would have wanted, anyone being sorry for her, especially me. I can understand how hurt Miss Crawford had to be. Well, no, I can't. It's like trying to imagine how I would feel if my own beloved, wonderful daughter, BD, were to write a bad book about me. Unimaginable. End quote. Mm-hmm. Well,
when did BD's book come out?
1985. BD did write a book about Betty Davis, painting her as an alcoholic and emotionally abusive, self-obsessed mother. This was considered quite a bit more sketchy. Her own brother disowned her over this book, and it came down that most people actually ended up feeling sympathy for Betty Davis. So I don't know what's true, but in general, it was seen as maybe not as truthful of an account. So Betty Davis died in 1989 of breast cancer. And that is the story of the Hollywood turf war between Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, two amazing divas.
Amazing.
Teresa, we're now going to turn to the story of the turf wars of 40 Elephants, which was an all-female gang that ruled London from at least the 1870s to the 1990s.
Holy God. Awesome.
They were first mentioned in a newspaper article from London in 1873, which called them Amazons, handsome women about 6 feet tall. Now, why were they called 40 Elephants? There are several possible origins. One is that their turf was in Lambeth in South London, and the landmark there is an elephant and castle statue. It's a statue of an elephant with a red elephant with a castle on top. Nearby, the Elephant and Castle pub was their unofficial headquarters. It's also said that elephant may have been their joking way of saying elegant to refer to themselves. And they also could have been named elephant for the way they looked after they shoved their coat pockets full of boosted goods from department stores.
Nice.
40 Elephants was, as far as we know, founded by South London's female thieves in the 1870s in order to get out from under the thumb of the male Elephant and Castle gang, who some of them had worked with as accomplices. So basically, these female thieves were tired of the small cuts of the gang's earnings, and so they struck out on their own. They did collaborate on occasion. The Elephant and Castle gang offered them protection on occasion. But this move was organized by artist, model, and thief extraordinaire Mary Carr, who became the group's first leader. Throughout the gang's over 100-year history, their leader and criminal mastermind behind their heists was known as the Queen.
Nice.
I mean, these women were really into shoplifting.
They love stealing.
They did. Their first tactic was a kind of smash and grab, where they would send in a bunch of women at the same time into one store. They would all run in, grab a bunch of stuff, and then they'd run out in different directions. So that even if one got caught, they weren't still going to walk off with some profit. They never kept the goods that they stole. They fenced them through a network of vendors and third parties, and then they used the money to buy the nice things they wanted or the things they needed. They would sleep with and then blackmail wealthy and influential men in London. They would also take jobs in wealthy households and then gain the lay of the land and inform their sisters, and then everyone would come in and rob the wealthy household and they'd take off.
Also love that. Yes. In general, I'm not a fan of stealing from individuals. Like I understand that theft is a moral question, et cetera, but I've also seen documentaries about how servants in these households were treated and how they were exploited. And so the fact that they're willing to take those positions in order to like, yeah, you know what, we're just gonna, there's a little bit of financial justice coming your way.
Right. Just a touch.
Yeah.
In 1915, Alice Diamond, also known as Diamond Annie, was named the Queen of 40 Elephants. She was 20 years old at the time.
Wow.
I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah, it is.
I'm just going to call her Alice. Alice was the daughter of a small-time thief, and she had been born and raised in a London workhouse.
Yeah, that's a tough life.
I mean, you can only imagine. And as we've said before, the prospects for women were few and mostly horrible. At 15, she had become a notorious shoplifter. Her first arrest was at 17, and it took 3 policemen to hold her down.
Yes, it did.
She was 5'9" at a time when the average height of a man was 5'6".
Yeah.
She was called Diamond Annie because she wore large diamond rings on her fingers that she used as brass knuckles to punch people with.
Yes.
I bet that shit hurt.
I bet it did.
She also carried a steel blackjack. I typed steel backpack, but I'm pretty sure it's blackjack. She once avoided arrest after shoplifting an expensive bracelet by slipping it into the pocket of the detective who was questioning her.
Nice.
By the age of 20, she learned how to put on the posh, as she called it, basically mimicking a movie star, wealthy, glamorous attitude that everyone expected. And so she used that to her advantage to fit in. And as we know, if you look like you fit in, you probably fit in.
Yeah.
Alice's lieutenant was Maggie Babyface Hughes, 4'11".
Oh, my Lord. Yes, I love this film.
Alice 5'9", Maggie 4'11". Tattoos on both arms, a hot temper, and a tendency toward the drink. She installed a periscope on the Ford V8 she drove to keep an eye out for the cops.
Oh my God, I love that.
Maggie's amazing. Alice organized the group into cells so that robberies could occur simultaneously, dividing the attention of police throughout the city. She wrote the Hoisters Code, guaranteeing that the group would operate democratically, divide funds from each heist evenly, and she established the requirement that the group care for the children of imprisoned members, and that the syndicate members always provide alibis for each other.
See, this is what's possible when you collaborate, people. Food cart vendors of New York, take note.
The group kept a bail fund to get their imprisoned members out of jail and pay attorney's fees. I mean, they had a social safety net better than ours here in the U.S. I will say, operate democratically, but she was in charge, and we'll see that that'll come in a little later.
Sure.
In Alice's view, laws, courts, and the police were all a plot on the part of the wealthy to keep all the wealth for themselves.
Seems pretty accurate.
She was once asked by a magistrate, after being acquitted, why she didn't like police officers. Her reply was, quote, "Police forces are set up by governments to stop others getting a share of what they've got." She's not wrong.
She's not wrong.
She brought cars into the gang's heists.
She's like, hey guys, you know what would be awesome is if we didn't have to run after.
So what happened was when things got too hot in London, they would go to somewhere like Coventry or Liverpool and execute their heists there. Alice promoted a glamorous lifestyle for the group. They lived the flapper life. They spent lots of money at bars and clubs, and they threw amazing parties. So you've got this like life of crime and glamour, which, as we know, is the best sandwich ever. She protected her turf ruthlessly. If a thief stole from a store in their area, they were expected to pay a percentage of their take to 40 elephants. I love that the stores in their area were theirs. They're like, oh, no, that's our store.
We haven't taken anything from it this week, but we will again in the future. We need to titrate how much we steal so that they can stay in business so that we can keep stealing from them.
If the other thieves didn't pay their percentage to 40 elephants, they were beaten or kidnapped until that percentage was paid.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, not super cool, but can't expect them to be perfect.
You can't expect a criminal syndicate to be perfect human beings. Right. I agree.
Under Alice's leadership, the group refined their shoplifting technique. So they started arriving in groups at department stores and hired cars, dressing elegantly, and using that to their advantage, as we white women do.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the social norms of the time, women were given some privacy while they were shopping for clothing. So the shopkeepers would keep a little bit of a distance, and they'd use this to smuggle goods into pockets and secret compartments in their bloomers, muffs, and coats. And they'd sneak stolen furs, gems, and clothing out of the stores. On at least one occasion, a member of the 40 elephants used a fake arm as a decoy, while her other arm cleverly snatched things from off the shelves.
Oh man, I love them.
They would also send in a group of noisy women, I think the technical term is a gaggle, into a store. And they would be loud and chatty and chaotic. And there was a big group of them. So, of course, the salespeople would all pay attention to these women. They would start throwing clothes everywhere. Like, I like this. Look at this. Right. So they'd play this, I would say, cliche of women. Right. But I'm imagining a bachelorette party.
Right. And the shop owner's got dollar signs in his eyes.
They'd stack up clothes on the counter, and then Alice would walk in, very demure, very cool, and start looking at things. And of course, the shopkeepers would completely ignore her because they've got this group of women to corral. And Alice would walk over, set her heavy coat on top of that stack of clothing that was set on the counter, and simply lift it up and walk out of the shop.
Oh my gosh.
Once Alice was well known as a thief, she'd use that to her advantage. She'd just walk through the store. And of course, every motherfucker in that store is like, watch her.
Yes.
So while they're all watching her accomplices are moving through the store and stealing whatever the hell they want.
Isn't it interesting how cooperation foils, people just don't understand. You might be working with other people.
Yeah.
No, we're in this together, man. This is a cooperative game here.
They'd also send someone in to look at a piece of jewelry. They'd take a really good look at it and memorize every detail, refuse to buy it, hand it back to the shopkeeper, and then they'd have a forger make a decoy out of plaster and then come back in and do just a simple sleight of hand to switch the two items. Then there was the chewing gum scam. In 1917, chewing gum was very popular. A thief would enter the department store chewing gum because the flappers all chewed gum, right? She would stick her gum under the ledge of the jewelry counter and ask to see usually something small like a ring. The shopkeeper would hand her the ring. She'd look at it and slip it onto the gum under the counter, and it'd stay there. The salesperson would then ask for the ring back, and she'd say, well, I don't have it. And they'd say, well, yes, you do. And she'd say, no, I don't. And they'd come around the counter and they'd start searching her. And of course, they wouldn't find the ring. And while they're all distracted searching her, another accomplice would come by and simply pull the ring off the piece of gum and walk scot-free out the door.
Nice.
They were involved in a ton of high-speed chases with the police, but the women were experts at passing the stolen goods off to another accomplice. So when they were caught, and the car was stopped, there was like nothing in there.
Let's just take a moment to think about what a high-speed chase looks like in central London.
Right. In the 20s, in the 30s.
You can go maybe a few blocks, and then you gotta like take a twist or a turn, or the road falls apart. Yeah.
It was probably real dangerous, I will say that. The women in the gang had to get approval for their relationships from Alice. And here's why. Because Alice figured any man who was dating or married to one of the 40 elephants, they were going to learn something. And basically, she wanted to be in control of who learned something. And she thought that it was important that she make sure that those dudes were cool.
It's reasonable.
In 1925, a member of 40 Elephants, Marie Britton, fell in love with a man, got pregnant, and against Alice's wishes, married him. Alice and the gang, having spent the night drinking on December 20th, gathered bottles and pieces of concrete and headed to Marie's house.
Oh, shit.
This is called the Lambeth Riot. They smashed their way into the house, they held a gun to Marie's head, and beat her new husband within an inch of his life.
Oh, my God.
The police came to the scene and arrested members of the group, including Maggie and Alice. Maggie got 21 months for inciting the riot. Of course, the small one incites the riot. And Alice got 18 months. Once Alice was in prison, another queen took over the gang, Lillian Rose Kendall, the bobbed hair bandit. And she was glamorous as fuck. You guys look her up. Lillian Rose Kendall. Oh, Alice ran a brothel in Lambeth after her release from prison, and she passed on her tips to other aspiring thieves. She died of MS in 1952 at the age of 55. The gang remained around until the 90s, but their heyday had ended and they gradually faded away. Or did they?
There's a 40E like hacker something, like, you know, tapping into CCTV footage, etc.
Exactly. My sources for today, Wikipedia. For the Joan Crawford and Betty Davis story, the website historyofyesterday.com. There's a Harper's Bazaar piece by Emma Dibdin that I highly recommend. The blog Stars and Letters, and an article on Vulture, which I highly recommend, by Angelica Jade Bastien. For the food truck story, there's an article on delish.com, a couple of New York Times articles, one by Corey Kilgannon, another by David Gonzalez, and a third article by Julia Moskin, again, all on newyorktimes.com. For 40 Elephants story, there's an article on Tree Hugger by Douglas McGowan. There's a fantastic piece on Bitch Media by Ann Foster that I recommend. There's a piece for the Daily Mail by Brian McDonald from his book, Alice Diamond and the 40 Elephants, the female gang that terrorized London. That piece was adapted by Christopher Stevens, but it's interesting because Brian McDonald's uncles actually ran the Elephant and Castle gang, the male gang, and so I assume he had some pretty cool access to documents and insider information. So
that's cool. Everybody
check all that out. Thank you so much for listening.
It was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your turf war stories, Claire. That was so great. It was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. Remember, please download, subscribe, and like our episodes, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Testing. Great. Thank you for listening to It Chooses You. Your hosts are Teresa Sparks and Claire Patton. Our theme song is by Bobby Dart. If you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us an email at itchoosesyoupodcast@gmail.com.